Okay, thank you. Probably, I think its time is already past, so perhaps I can start this next session with the Independent Evaluation Department. Good morning to those of you in Samarkand, and good afternoon to colleagues joining us from Manila and other locations. Thank you very much for all of you for taking the time to be with us today. My name is Jiro Tominaga, Deputy Director General of the Independent Evaluation Department of the Asian Development Bank. It is my pleasure to open this session on behalf of our Director General Manny Jimenez, who unfortunately could not join us due to logistical constraints. He asked me to convey his warm greetings and his regret at not being able to be here. So this annual dialogue between IED and civil society organizations has become a valued tradition during the ADB annual meeting. It is always one of the highlights in the program for us, as it reflects a core principle of IED's work, that evaluations must be transparent, inclusive, and informed by diverse perspectives. Engagement with civil society is very important for us. CSOs bring grounded insights, community perspectives, and independent voices that help strengthen both the relevance and credibility of our evaluations. Through these exchanges, we are better able to identify blind spots, validate our findings, and then also ensure that our recommendations are practical and meaningful. Today's dialogue will focus on insights from a few upcoming evaluations. We will look at first ADB's engagement with civil society, examining how we collaborate with CSO and how this partnership can be further strengthened. The second focus is on ADB's support to small island developing states, assessing how we can respond more effectively to the unique challenges and vulnerabilities these countries face. We will also touch on the upcoming evaluation of the Asian Development Fund, ADF. So we see this dialogue as part of an ongoing relationship with civil society. Your feedback and perspectives are important to making our evaluations sharper, more relevant, and ultimately more useful for ADB's operations and also for the communities we serve. So I encourage you to share your reflections, questions, and suggestions during the discussion. With that, it is my pleasure to hand over to our colleagues, Eoghan Molloy and Nassreena Baddiri, Senior Evaluation Specialists, both of them at IED, and then to Andrew Brubaker, Director for Thematic and Country Division of IED, who will lead today's session. So thank you very much, and I look forward to a rich and productive dialogue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jiro. Indeed. So my name is Eoghan Molloy. I'm a Senior Evaluation Specialist with the Independent Evaluation Department at ADB. And good morning to everyone in the room, or good afternoon to those online, wherever you may be. I'll briefly introduce the ongoing independent evaluation of ADB's civil society engagement. Now, as Jiro mentioned, this evaluation looks at ADB's engagement with civil society, but over a period of the period of 2016 to 2025. It is the first standalone evaluation on this topic in more than 20 years. Now, just to preface that this is still an ongoing evaluation, so the purpose of today's presentation is not necessarily to present findings, but rather to give you an overview of the evaluation's context, the scope of the evaluation, the questions we're trying to answer, the methods we're applying, as well as the timeline for that evaluation. But I'd be happy to take any questions or comments afterwards. Next slide, please. So just by way of background, civil society engagement is not new at ADB, as I mentioned. So it's long been an agenda for the bank, and it has a long-standing policy basis as well, including the 1995 governance policy with its grounding in participation, and then, of course, the 1998 NGO policy. Now, that policy foundation has also since been reinforced through the Access to Information policy, through Strategy 2030, and even the new environmental and social framework. The other point to note at the outset is that engagement with civil society happens through multiple entry points across the bank, not only through the operations and projects, but also through institutional partnerships, policy consultations, and indeed through country programming. The other important context note about, for this evaluation too is, to recognize that ADB's definition of civil society is very broad. So this covers both advocacy, civil society actors, as well as the operational actors. So this covers from community-based organizations and user groups at the grassroots level through to international NGOs, think tanks, trade unions, philanthropies, and even business associations and chambers of commerce. So a very wide spectrum. The other point to note is that ADB sometimes engages directly with some of these organizations or actors, but in other cases, for instance, at the operational level, it is often government engaging with civil society on ADB financed operations. So again, a wide spectrum of different organizations and types of civil society actors who engage in different ways and at different levels with ADB. We can move to the next slide, please. So then just the evaluation purpose, as I said, it's been 20 years since the last evaluation, but there has been a kind of renewed let's say, ambition for ADB's engagement and relationship with civil society. So in that context, the evaluation poses the more practical question on whether ADB is actually set up to deliver on that ambition. So the purpose of the evaluation is not only looking backwards and taking stock of the engagement to date, but also to inform ADB's approach to civil society engagement going forward. At its core, the evaluation is asking whether that engagement is meaningful in practice and whether it is becoming institutionalized, and under what conditions is that engagement most relevant to the development effectiveness of ADB's investments. We're covering through this evaluation ADB's engagement broadly around 3 levels. So again, at that institutional level, through policy and corporate processes. Secondly, the sub-regional and country level. And third, through the project and programs. We're taking a comparative perspective, so drawing lessons from other multilateral development banks, for instance, and comparing the extent to which ADB's approaches align with those of other partners. We're covering the period 2016 to 2025, a 10-year period. That's also because that covers when ADB began systematically tracking the engagement with civil society through its sovereign operations. But given that this is the first standalone evaluation on this topic in over 2 decades, we're also taking a somewhat more broad historical perspective and looking at the evolution of that approach over time. Finally, here, I'll just note that, just to be clear on the boundaries, this is not a review of safeguards compliance, nor is it a review of the accountability mechanism, which has its own review process, and that's currently ongoing. But the other point to note is that this is not an assessment of the internal effectiveness of CSOs themselves, nor indeed of ADB's developing member countries. So next slide, please. Okay, again, just giving you an overview of the evaluation. So the evaluation is organized around 3 main questions or 3 main strands of inquiry. The first is on the institutional enabling environment. So asking the question, is ADB actually set up for meaningful engagement with civil society? And here we're looking at the relevance and coherence of ADB's policies and strategies around civil society engagement, its staffing and structures. We're looking at the incentives that may facilitate that engagement, as well as the business processes, the systems, and the guidance that exist for ADB staff. So very much looking at that internal architecture within ADB, which enables civil society engagement. Secondly, in the middle of this slide, we're very much focusing on the how so how meaningful is that engagement in practice? And here we're looking across those levels I described of, project, country, and the policy levels at the organization. And this includes looking at issues such as the timeliness of the engagements, the quality of that engagement, the inclusiveness, the continuity of the engagement, or whether it's just a one-off, for instance, and whether there's kind of feedback or responsiveness as a result of that engagement. Finally, the third question that we're trying to answer is around the contribution and, let's say, mutual benefit. So what outcomes does civil society engagement contribute to, and under what conditions? So here we're trying to explore plausible pathways to development effectiveness, for instance, or for greater inclusion as a result of engaging with civil society, effects on accountability, for instance, or the sustainability of ADB's interventions. And we're also looking to see, are there mutual benefits for civil society itself by engaging with ADB? The next slide, please. Then just to give an overview of how we are going about this in terms of our methodology, well, it's very much a mixed methods approach. So that involves using document and literature review. We're conducting an analysis of ADB's portfolio of operations to see patterns of the different types of engagement across sovereign operations, across sectors, across different modalities. There's also, as I mentioned, this benchmarking element, comparing ADB's approach with peer multilateral development banks. The other aspect is very much a qualitative angle. So here, through interviews and focus group discussions with ADB staff, with civil society representatives, with government counterparts, and even affected populations and communities where relevant. So trying to hear all different perspectives on, what is meaningful and in what context. We're also fielding surveys to capture broader perceptions and experience, both from civil society itself and internally from ADB staff. I'll just note that those are still ongoing. And finally, we have country case studies to inform the evaluation. Those, they're listed on the slide, include Cambodia, Georgia, Sri Lanka, and Papua New Guinea. And these were selected to give variation in country context, the portfolio composition in terms of ADB's operations, different regions, of course, different operating environments, but also different ways in which ADB engages in each country. So to give us a sort of a view across different contexts. Next slide, please. Okay, now, finally, then I'll just give you a quick snapshot of where we are in the process. So the approach paper was approved in December 2025. So very much a lot of the evaluation work has been undertaken in the past few months in the first parts of 2026. So we've moved through desk review, portfolio analysis, and then into the country missions. We're now at a stage where those country case studies are largely complete, and the remaining interviews, survey work, data analysis, and synthesis, all of that is being finalized as we move then into the report writing stage. The report itself is due for publication and presentation to ADB's board in October of 2026. So today's presentation comes very much at an interim point during the evaluation process, which is why we can't really present on conclusions at this stage. I think next slide, and I think here I can stop and I'll hand over to my colleague Nassreena Baddiri, who will say a few words on other evaluations that our department is conducting. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Owen, and thank you, Jiro, as well. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to those in Manila as well. My name is Nassreena Baddiri, and I will briefly share an update on IED's current evaluation of ADB support to small island developing states. And then I will also invite you to share your thoughts on a forthcoming IED evaluation of the Asian Development Fund. Next slide, please. Small island developing states face a distinctive set of structural and interlinked constraints, including geographic isolation, high exposure to climate and economic shocks, limited institutional capacity, and narrow private sectors. These constraints are not isolated challenges. They reinforce one another. For example, remoteness raises the costs of infrastructure projects and service delivery. And as we can see in many cases, climate shocks can quickly reverse development gains. Capacity constraints are the biggest bottleneck, with governments and SIDS having to manage many responsibilities with very small administrations. To examine ADB support in this context, the evaluation uses a mixed methods approach. This includes in-depth portfolio analysis, country case studies, and consultations with ADB staff, governments, development partners, and representatives of local organizations and civil society groups. We also conducted evaluation missions to Fiji, Kiribati, Maldives, Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste, and Tonga, with a virtual mission in Cook Islands, as well as related IED work in Papua New Guinea and on the Kiribati Road Rehabilitation Project. The core question guiding this evaluation is, to what extent did ADB support improvements in the well-being and resilience of SIDS DMCs? In answering this, we are looking not only at what ADB financed, but also at whether its support was well adapted to SIDS realities, whether it contributed to building institutions and resilience, and whether its operational model is fit for purpose in small and highly vulnerable countries. And for today's discussion, we are especially interested in how this question resonates with the civil society experience, particularly how we can leverage CSO's local knowledge to improve projects and reach communities. The evaluation reviews ADB's portfolio in SIDS from 2012 to 2024 and looks at strategy, delivery, results, and institutional practices. The report itself will be published by mid-June next month. We also want to use this as a bridge to our next discussion on the forthcoming IED evaluation of the Asian Development Fund. Many of the issues that are raised in the SIDS evaluation report, climate vulnerability, institutional capacity limits, crisis response issues, and also local resilience are central to the ADF, the Asian Development Fund. And now we also want to hear from you how similar issues should inform the upcoming ADF evaluation. Now turning to the next slide, please. ADF, or the Asian Development Fund, is ADB's main source of concessional assistance for its poorest and most vulnerable developing member countries, and this include countries facing limited debt servicing capacity, fragility, structural vulnerability, and high exposure to shocks. This is particularly relevant as well for SIDS, small island developing states, and countries in fragile and conflict-affected situations. Under the concessional assistance policy for the ADF 14 cycle, which covers 2025 to 2028, ADF resources are expected to prioritize countries at high or moderate risk of debt distress, structurally vulnerable countries, including SIDS, and thematic priorities such as climate action, disaster risk reduction, regional cooperation and integration, as well as gender equality. For us at IED, this raises an important evaluative question. ADF is not only about the amount of financing provided, but also whether these scarce concessional and grant resources are being used in the ways that are relevant, well-targeted, and effective in addressing the most challenging development issues in SIDS and FCAS. So for today's discussion, we would be very much be interested to hear from your perspective, what are the most important issues an evaluation of the Asian Development Fund should examine to understand whether it is making a difference for vulnerable countries and communities. And building on the points raised by Eoghan as well, we are also especially interested in hearing your perspectives on what these evaluations should pay attention to from a civil society standpoint. And with that, I'll hand over to Andrew. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nash, and thank you, Eoghan, for those introductory slides. Hopefully they gave a good flavor of some of the work that IED is currently undertaking And now very much we want to, as Nash alluded to, they were just basically the sweetener for our discussion, and hopefully they prompted some thoughts from your end. But now we really want to turn it over and open the floor for discussion to hear from you and get the dialogue going. We can talk about these evaluations that were highlighted today around the actual civil society evaluation, which I'm sure you have some views, the SIDS, and the upcoming Asian Development Fund evaluation. But we're also happy to listen or get any other views that you have. And to help with the discussion today, apologize that none of us are in the room with you, but I understand we have a couple colleagues who have volunteered to help moderate, facilitate from inside the room. So I know we've got Mureta and Marjorie there, and hopefully if they could help open the floor and we could take some feedback from the room first, and then we can move online, if that would be okay. Thank you.
Anyone has a question here in the room? I'm happy to bring the microphone. And there's one already from Mark, so I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for this presentation. Mark Fedor from the Coalition for Human Rights in Development. I just, with respect to FCAS evaluation, the Fragile and Conflict Affected States evaluation, or work in those, I think one of the things we often see in these contexts, generally I would even see, is that it's creating a climate where people are unable to speak out. It's dangerous for them to speak out. And I would encourage the evaluation to look at how is the ADB managing to actually make sure that people are able to be consulted and consulted freely without fear of any reprisals in a context like that. So I think that's just one aspect I would very much encourage. It's not so much a question, but a recommendation around that.
Should we take a second question, or you want to answer first?
Although I'd like to hear if that's something you had in mind, actually, as a question.
Yeah, I can take that. If I think, is that specific to the civil society engagement evaluation? But in any case, yes, I mean, that's exactly one of the kind of elements we're looking at. So when ADB describes its engagement as meaningful, you know, if that engagement is not safe, then that obviously questions the meaningfulness of that engagement. So that's something that we are kind of considering when we unpack what does meaningful engagement mean. I'm using the word meaningful because that's the word that ADB uses itself to describe, you know, the quality of its engagement. So a big question for the evaluation is, you know, again, what is meaningful and for whom, and indeed in which context. So, you know, to your question, Mark, or your comment, you know, that's one of the angles we're considering as well. I mentioned that, you know, we have country cases, but, you know, the idea is that we're looking across all of ADB's operations and, you know, the very varying contexts in which ADB operates and the different entry points and possibilities for engaging civil society in different ways in different contexts. I will also note that, you know, this evaluation is happening very much in the context of, you know, the new environmental social framework is also just kicked in and is now under implementation in 2026. It's still very early days, but, you know, that question of the readiness, let's say, and the kind of positioning of the bank to even deliver on some of those commitments and the standards that were set, including standards around reprisal risk. You know, that's also part of, you know, we're very much, you know, considering that as part of the context in which this evaluation is taking place. And maybe even there again, there's also a standard on stakeholder engagement, again, which broadens that responsibility. So maybe that's just a sort of a, yes, we're very much aware of this and the kind of risks and the opportunities then for ADB to adapt its modes of engagement in different contexts. I mean, that's one of the central focus areas of the evaluation. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Mark, do you want to add anything? Okay, then we can go over Sukura.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sukural Oyutolgawach from Mongolia. And my question is about the evaluation, the upcoming evaluation of ADB's programs. And to give a little background, ADB has been involved in urban development in Mongolia since 1997. Today, after these many years of ADB's involvement, Mongolia is the highest traffic jam capital in the world, highest air pollution capital in the world. It's number one at all of these areas. And today, ADB is implementing a series of projects in urban development, which involve housing, involve road infrastructure, heating, etc. It's building 6 coal-fired heating plants, etc. And Mongolian urban development is, if you just look at this little fact that over half of Mongolia's population resides now in this cramped capital city, regardless of the fact that the whole territory is about 3 times the France territory. So how do I go about asking for an evaluation of ADB's portfolio, urban sector portfolio in Mongolia?
Maybe I can come in on that one if we're responding one by one. That's a great question. In fact, I really liked just your overview and quick assessment of the many challenges that are faced in Mongolia in the urban sector. It really captures well many of the challenges that ADB's DMCs face in these rapidly developing economies with big aspirations to keep growing with these urban centers. And there are many challenges that you highlighted around helping with that. So it's well taken, and it is a priority for ADB, and we do assess ADB's priorities around these areas. There was an evaluation not too long ago about ADB's contribution to livable cities, but this kind of subsector or sector-specific and country-specific evaluations are possible. And what we can do is we can make note of that here. And when we discuss the forward program for the independent evaluation department, we can raise this as a possible subject to consider for evaluation, because I think, as you rightly highlighted, it would be highly relevant and probably offer a lot of lessons, not just for the country, but also for ADB. So it is a very good suggestion, and we will take it into consideration. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions from the floor? Like there is another one.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shoira Olimova, Public Organization Dior, Tajikistan. First of all, thanks for updating about upcoming report and providing timeline on it. Just to clarify, it's a question. You mentioned about the midterm review, right? It will start from July to September, right? Is it open public document to provide our comments or feedback, or we will see then the last options, I mean the final one? And it's quite interesting to see what is the outcome has been brought from this evaluation, and what will be the result of the further connection with civil societies for ADB. Thank you.
Thank you. And then there's another question in the chat. I will quickly announce that as well and then give it back to you. It's, will the raw data from these country case studies be made public and accessible to local CSOs to allow for independent verification of the findings? So maybe you can answer these two questions together.
Okay, I think I can take some of this or part of it. Just in relation to the evaluation of ADB's engagement with civil society, indeed, civil society is not just the subject of the evaluation, but part of the evaluation process. We have tried to incorporate different perspectives. For instance, through the early conceptualization of the evaluation, we've had several interactions with different civil society representatives, including, for instance, the NGO Forum on ADB and others. At the country level, we have included engagement with a range of civil society actors around, projects, CPS processes, and that broader country level engagement. I guess the other point is that, this covers such a wide range of actors, across the whole civil society sphere. We have, interviews obviously and interactions going at all levels. We do plan to engage with civil society as the process continues. In terms of disseminating, findings of the evaluation, like a draft report, here we would follow the kind of the processes of the internal evaluation department. So there we are exploring, avenues for, some kind of sounding on messages, for instance. However, I will say that the report itself will be a public document, so it is just available on ADB's website as soon as it goes to board presentation. And from that point on as well, there will be an extensive effort to disseminate those findings in a public, open, transparent manner, and to discuss those and to discuss the implications of the findings and the recommendations, also with civil society. So in our approach paper for the evaluation, we have a kind of dissemination plan as well, and an outreach and engagement plan, where we have inbuilt, let's say, options to do, very much kind of sessions with civil society actors at different levels. So again, we will follow the kind of the normal process of our kind of how these reports come to the board, but the idea then is to have a very open and transparent publication and dissemination of the report, the findings, and the recommendations.
Can I just come in on one point on that, Eoghan, and then we can ask the second question. I think it's very good because I can see the chat here, and the question was also about making publicly available the individual country case studies. And we will probably we will not publish each one as a separate independent report. However, because of the nature of this evaluation, and although, as Eoghan said, we will follow the general ADB processes for these corporate level evaluations, we have been working with Ryan Hassan and the NGO Forum, and we've been talking to them about how can we get early feedback once we kind of finish all our data collection and before we actually finalize the report. So there will be an opportunity to have some kind of exchange. Now, the best way to do that, we're still working out how we can crowd in as many views as possible for that process. But we are planning to integrate that kind of extra step, which we may not do in some other evaluations. But there will be an opportunity to get some early feedback and also hear from you again if there's interest from civil society. Thanks. And the second question, was that for you, Nash?
Right. Yes. Thanks for that question. And for the SIDS evaluation and the upcoming ADF evaluation, we do intend to include substantive case study reports in our appendices as well, just to make sure that we are able to share some of the findings from the country missions to those that are reading the report, and that's going to be part of the report, which Eoghan also mentioned, that will be publicly shared and disseminated as well.
Okay, next, maybe we'll take the one question from the Zoom chat first. There's somebody raising their hands, and then we have another one here in the room. So Valerie, Maybe you can have your question first. Valerie, could you, if possible, could you ask a question? Otherwise, if not, we could go to, yes, Siosaya.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Malo Lily from Tonga. My name is Jerry Jolene from the Tonga Ladies Association, the LGBT network here, and in Tonga. I wanted to know, how is the ADB operationalizing the roadmap for SOGIES inclusive development 2025-2030 to ensure that the Pacific SOGIES communities who face unique geographic and social isolation receive direct and de-risk financial investments and tailored technical assistance that move beyond general gender equality frameworks?
And then we have another question here in the room. So we'll take that and then you can answer the two questions.
Thank you so much. It's a very brief question. So this is Hasina from International Rescue Committee, and IRC has been working closely with World Bank in terms of over the past few years to support them in some of their policy reform discussions and the evaluations are happening in terms of World Bank's engagement with CSOs. And I was wondering, you mentioned in the evaluation methods that engaging with other MDBs is something that you are doing. So is there any reflections that we can share right now? Because we do know that some MDBs are more advanced than others in terms of CSO engagement at a policy level, but also at an operational level, particularly for countries where there's fragility and conflict, where there's a need for more active engagement with CSOs. We do see, like, I mean, more engagement from banks like World Bank, and we hope to see ADB in this space in Asia. So I just wanted to kind of understand, is that the direction that we can hope that ADB will be going in over the coming days? Thank you.
Oh. Well, I can come in there, or
Want to take the gender questions,
Yeah,
Nash, from the gender evaluation perspective on SOGI?
Yes. Okay. So, yeah, on the, SOGI perspective, just to clarify and to note that actually myself and Nash, we were co-leading the 2024 corporate or thematic evaluation of ADB's support to gender equality. And, so these conversations, around, even the definition of gender and all of this, was very live during that time. I will say, that, we are the evaluation department, so we can't really comment now on 2026 as to what the commitment of the bank is or different departments. I will say, however, that even today, as I'm evaluating, the engagement of the bank with civil society, a part of that constituency is, includes even, the LGBTQ plus advocacy groups, for instance, who have engaged on different policy mechanisms at ADB. So again, this is still an issue that we are, looking at in even, today's evaluations. So again, on the status of the roadmap, I'm not sure if I can comment on that. My knowledge is mostly from 2024, where we, are the independent evaluation department. But I do know, that we are in consultation now today, more around the quality of engagement and, how that has evolved over time, even with, SOGI groups, LGBTQI advocacy groups as well as part of this evaluation. I think there was another question on the kind of MDB benchmarking exercise that I mentioned in the slide as part of our methodology. And, indeed, it's probably too early to kind of say, oh, these are the headline findings, rather just to say that, yes, this is, a kind of cornerstone of the evaluation as well, to see how does ADB's approach compare or contrast with those of other similar institutions, such as the World Bank or EBRD, other multilateral development banks out there. And we do see differences, of course, even in terms of the kind of structure and staffing arrangements for this. For instance, ADB has its NGO and civil society center, whereas you'll find in the World Bank a very different way of organizing, even internally, the responsibilities and the staff skills, let's say, for engaging with civil society. So we're looking across all these, in terms of the staffing, the structures in place, as well as the business processes, indeed, even the ability to provide small grant financing and across the different MDBs, where is that allowed, and the procurement arrangement. So maybe all I can say at this stage is that, yes, we're looking across all of these dimensions and comparing ADB's approaches and systems with those of other MDBs. And then in terms of ADB going forward, that very much would depend on its response to the recommendations of this evaluation, again, when they come out later in 2026.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Kyle. Oxfam Fair Finance Asia program. We're a network of over 90 CSOs in Asia working together to ensure that financial institutions like ADB uphold the rights of communities and the environment. I would like to take this opportunity to share some comments from our partners in Responsa Bank Indonesia, our coalition in Indonesia, specifically from their member WALI, the Indonesian Forum from the Environment. WALI has repeatedly raised concerns about ADB's consultation processes. They often view the consultations as tick box exercises, lacking meaningful participation, so much so that in some cases they feel it's not worth attending. A specific case is the Cirebon Coal Power Plant early retirement pilot project. WALI and some community members argued that while ADB claimed to have consulted broadly with affected residents, many participants were actually closely linked to village authorities. As a result, some segments of the community felt excluded from discussions, particularly around the early retirement of the plant. These concerns have persisted even after the pilot project was eventually canceled. ADB should go the extra mile to use alternative approaches to identify and engage communities rather than relying on village authorities. This is important to ensure consultations are genuinely inclusive and representative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. And then we'll also take the question from Nas, because as I believe it's also on CSO engagement.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, AD, for conducting this particular session on CSO engagement. I think it was mentioned earlier in the presentation about the meaningful engagement. Wanted to clarify whether this particular meaningful engagement is universally applied to each particular engagement, or would it be case-to-case basis in defining this particular, or how engagement is really meaningful? Thank you.
Thank you. And then lastly, I'll add on one question from the chat, which is also in that area. So the question is, each project requires the employment of various types of workers at the project level. The right to bargain collectively is one of the core labor standards, as well as an important institution, together with social dialogue. There have been rampant labor violations in the Asia and the Pacific region. My question is whether the upcoming evaluation would include this labor aspect or not. Thank you for this session online. Thanks.
maybe I'll start with Kyle's question and then Owen about the specific evaluation. You can come in. But no, I appreciate that, Kyle and your colleagues from Indonesia. You know, the specific case you raised, that's really not IEDs where IED gets involved. But I very much appreciate what you raised about, which is important for IED when it does its evaluations, which is to assess the quality of those interactions. And in some cases, what does good consultation look like? And in your example, where you said in some cases you may need to find alternative avenues rather than village leaders to do that. That's an excellent point, and that is the type of question we would ask when we look at some of these specific cases at the project level. But in terms of your Indonesia case, we won't look at that specifically, but the principle is absolutely correct, and you framed it very well. And that maybe that's something we will look at going forward. You know, the other question that was raised about how we work with the other institutions and how we work with our colleagues in evaluation at World Bank, et cetera. We know one interesting thing about World Bank is they're further ahead with their ESF, and they're doing an early evaluation of that, and it's very much focused on this dimension that was raised in terms of the standard around the quality of stakeholder consultation. We're engaged with them on that. We're supporting them in their evaluation, and that's another way that we share information and learn from each other. And we do recognize that this has been a challenging area for the MDBs, so it is something that we generally try to look at through our different evaluation products. Thanks. Owen, just on then the labor standards.
Yeah, and I think there was a question on meaningfulness and unpacking that, you know, for different contexts. I'll also just quickly say to you know, Wally's point, I think, and the the Indonesia example, you know, we also will be fielding a survey among civil society representatives, and we're hoping that that link could be disseminated, you know, widely, and hopefully the CSO networks can also, you know, help in that dissemination. That could also be an avenue for such instances or stories or experiences of engagement to be actually, you know, shared with the evaluation team as well. And that indeed is the type of thing that we're looking at, you know, that when engagement happens, I think it even links back to Mark's point about, you know, the safety in general, and you know, the quality of that engagement. So thank you for bringing that up. And then just on this meaningfulness dimension, you know, so yes, I use the word meaningful again because that's the word that ADB uses. And a big question, of course, for the evaluation is, well, you know, what does that entail? You know, what is meaningfulness, to whom, and you know, in which context, and who gets to call it meaningful or not? So we are trying to unpack that, you know, much more detail. Let's say our approach paper, we outlined some dimensions of what that might mean in practice. So I think I already mentioned in the presentation about, you know, the timeliness of that engagement. If we're talking about a project, does it come early enough? Let's say if we're talking about consultation on design, it could be about the inclusiveness, you know, of the engagement. So who is actually included, and you know that, you know, it links back also to the example: is this a representative consultation? You know, the continuity, is it just a one-off engagement or is it regular? Does it have influence, or is there any traction, or you know, is it just, you know, we consulted and then, you know, job done? So again, you know, we've tried to unpack this into different dimensions. I think, you know, the main kind of, you know, one observation that's already emerging and is quite clear is that, as I mentioned in the presentation, you know, civil society is a very, you know, broad ecosystem of players, you know, and it's you know, straddling, you know, from the global level to the regional, the country, you know, all the way going down to the community level, where you have, you know, community groups and farmer user groups. And I guess the challenge with this evaluation, but also, I guess, for ADB, it's, you know, it's not just one segment of that whole ecosystem. It's a very broad and encompassing ecosystem. And of course, each entity or type of civil society organization might have a different relationship with ADB. They may be service providers on a contractual basis, or they may be more advocacy type groups, more concerned about safeguards and grievance redress. The point being that, what is meaningful to one actor might be very different to another. So indeed, we're very much aware of this. That's something that's really being highlighted. So again, this is a term that ADB uses, and I guess what's already evident is that this is very kind of context and case specific. So we're exploring that as much as we can. There was a question, I think, on labor, and I guess on this, I will just say again that, this is a corporate evaluation about ADB's engagement with that very diverse ecosystem that we call civil society. And indeed, in that sense, it's more about the kind of systems and corporate processes in place, and whether ADB is set up institutionally to ensure that there is so-called meaningful engagement at all the different levels. So it's less about, going into detail on every single group within the ecosystem and assessing then how is ADB engaging, but rather just institutionally, does ADB have the capacity then to engage in a meaningful way and have that dialogue and those consultations? But also, just to kind of confirm that, yes, indeed, trade unions and labor groups are indeed part of that broad definition. So then they do come under the purview of the evaluation. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are going to take a last round of questions since we're like close to the end of the sessions. And we have another question here in the room.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Matthew Kelson from the International Disability Alliance. We represent thousands of organizations of persons with disabilities globally, many of which are in the Asia and the Pacific. So thank you very much for the presentations on the evaluations, which were very clear. And we've also taken note of the recent comments that you just made on engagement with specific types of civil society organizations. We did want to raise one particular point on the engagement with civil society evaluation. We noted that in the evaluation approach paper, persons with disabilities were referenced in the context of the inclusiveness of consultations, but there was no reference of organizations of persons with disabilities in the document. Organizations of persons with disabilities, or OPDs, are a distinct type of civil society organization. They're defined in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, further elaborated on in General Comment number 7. And also, importantly, we would highlight that the centrality of consulting with OPDs specifically is referenced across ADB's 2021 to 2025 Strengthening Disability Inclusive Development Roadmap. So we would like to just ask how consultations with OPDs will be factored into the evaluation, both in terms of the methodological approach and also the scope of the findings, and also how the Disability Inclusive Development Roadmap, ADB's roadmap, will be considered in the evaluation. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. And then we'll just take the last two questions also from the chat, and then I'll hand back over to you. So the evaluation notes that SIDS face narrow private sectors. In light of this, how does the ADB balance its portfolio between large-scale non-sovereign investments and sovereign support for MSMEs? Specifically, what mechanisms are in place to ensure that larger infrastructure or foreign-led projects create downstream opportunities for local small-scale enterprises rather than displacing them? And then another comment from Wawa Wang: the Coalition of Monitoring Infrastructure Development in Indonesia and Just Finance International wish to raise concerns about the use of military and police in ADB client-hosted information session meetings, not to be confused with the consultation. Ahead of a forced eviction in the Java 1 project in 2024 and 25. Note that Java 1 project is under compliance review. Communities describe a coercive environment in which they felt pressured to accept the terms and sign documents. We'd be happy to contribute to IAD's ongoing review and case studies. So with both these last questions and comments, back over to you for last answers and the closing remarks.
Owen and Nash, you want to go, and then I can sum up or I can close then.
Yes, thanks. Thank you. Thank you for that question, specifically on SIDS and non-sovereign engagement as well. As we've seen in the report, actually, that ADB's private sector engagement really varies across SIDS. So there are larger, more commercially integrated economies, but there are also much more smaller economies and markets. But really, across most SIDS, the structural issue of thin markets and narrow private sectors is there, and that there's really a scarcity of bankable sponsors that we're seeing. And ADB's private sector approach, even through the ADF's private sector window, has been sort of uneven in terms of implementation, particularly as mentioned, the need to really link the upstream reforms through sovereign operations and linking it down to downstream financing. There have been recent initiatives, particularly in 2025, including ADB's Frontier Seed Pacific, as well as Wayfinder, which aims to really provide that and catalyze private sector operations towards MSMEs. And one thing that that our report also will be highlighting is really the need for alternative mechanisms, particularly for private sector engagement in SIDS, and that's also including the use of financial intermediaries, which can help scale up the reach of ADB's non-sovereign operations in economies where there you have thin markets and shallow private sectors.
Okay, and maybe I can just quickly come in. Yes, so I will just say on the National Disability Alliance, thank you for raising that and flagging this point. I guess to this I would reiterate that indeed it's a corporate level evaluation looking at the engagement of the bank with that whole ecosystem of civil society, and more in terms of the processes and systems in place. And yet there are obviously very core and important constituencies across all levels of that civil society ecosystem. So the challenge then, of course, is to really get the full picture. And to that, I will say that even we in the evaluation have to sort of focus in on certain levels because it's very broad. So we are using a sort of case study methodology, and through our country cases, we're actually uncovering a lot in terms of how ADB does engage. And indeed, in one of the country cases, we saw a very promising engagement on the transport sector, where an organization supporting persons with disabilities also actually contributed to the development of sort of good practice guidelines on disability inclusion in the transport sector. So cases like that are emerging through our methodology, but I think you kind of raise an important reminder as well for the evaluation to ensure that there is inclusiveness as well in our scope. I think I can stop there. Was there the other point on the Java 1 project, or? Maybe just to say that thank you for flagging this again, that these kind of cases are again speak to the the quality of the engagement and indeed that safety element. So these are all examples, and maybe again as we disseminate a survey for this evaluation, that could be a good avenue for sharing such instances and experiences. That could be helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Owen and Nash. And thank you for all the participants. Really appreciate all the feedback. And Meherte, thank you very much for facilitating. You did an excellent job in the room. I didn't know if you knew you were going to get that responsibility, but very well done. I think it really helped us quite a bit in terms of getting feedback and learning, which is great in the intention of this meeting. We really appreciate hearing from all the civil society and all the perspectives here. It's a good reminder of the value that civil society brings and why it's important for IED. I mean, many things here I took note of. Some things on future topics for us to consider evaluating, either specifically in Mongolia or more generally about stakeholder consultation. These are important aspects. Also, back to the where we kind of closed on Indonesia and those specific examples, those are very powerful. So let's also close the loop on, as Owen's saying, if we are going to have a survey, let's figure out how we can get as much feedback as possible. And that may open up other opportunities for a bit more engagement with the CSO evaluation team and you and your other stakeholders, which would be quite valuable for all of us. And I think the real reminder, this meeting is a real reminder of why this meeting is so important for us, is ultimately we have the same end goal in sight, which is that we're trying to ensure that ADB's assistance and its partnerships with the government and the projects it support ultimately deliver meaningful results for beneficiaries and the people they're intended to serve. So ultimately, that's what we still need to all continue to work together towards. So with that, I just would encourage you to stay engaged with us. Thanks again for all the support. We'll check in and make sure we find a way that you can get direct access to our survey for the ongoing evaluation. And we very much look forward to continue working with you as we move on to these other evaluations around the Asian Development Fund and other things that we'll have in the forward program. So thank you very much for your participation and hope to engage with you again soon. Thank you.